The cafe in Lagos was full of noise and laughter until a sharp voice cut through. Zuri, a young mother with tired eyes and simple clothes, sat quietly with her little boy, Tay. She had saved enough money to buy him a small snack, and he ate it happily, unaware of the stares. At the next table, a group of wealthy women leaned close, their perfume heavy in the air. One of them looked at Zuri and smirked. "Single mothers are just failures waiting to happen," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The others laughed, their jewelry catching the light as they whispered cruel things about her clothes and her life. Zuri held her son close, forcing a smile so he would not see her pain. But when one of the women suddenly grabbed Tay's small school shoes from under the table and waved them around like a joke, the room erupted in laughter. Tay's little hands clutched his mother's dress as he hid behind her, his face buried in fear. For a moment, Zuri felt her chest tighten with despair, a heavy silence pressing down on her. The cafe that had once been full of chatter grew still, with every eye fixed on the cruel scene. Zuri wanted to disappear, but her son's trembling reminded her she had no choice but to endure. The laughter of the women echoed like a cruel drumbeat, and for the first time, she felt completely powerless, trapped in shame she could not escape. Zuri tried to keep calm, her arms wrapped tightly around Tay as if she could shield him from the cruel laughter. She whispered softly in his ear, telling him it was okay, but her voice shook. The women's laughter grew louder, and their mocking words cut deeper with each passing second. One of them suddenly leaned down, her polished nails flashing as she snatched Tay's worn school shoes right from under the table. She held them high like a prize, waving them back and forth as if they were something dirty. The sound of laughter exploded again, bouncing off the cafe walls. People turned their heads, some hiding smiles, others pretending not to see. Tay's little face went pale, and he quickly pressed himself into his mother's side, burying his head in her clothes. His tiny hands clutched her dress, trembling as the women teased him. Zuri felt her heart twist in pain. It was no longer just about her. Her son was being dragged into their cruelty, and she could do nothing to stop it. She reached out a hand to grab the shoes back, but the woman pulled them away, smirking as the others giggled. The cafe that had once been filled with soft music and the smell of coffee now felt heavy and cruel. The laughter of strangers rang in Zuri's ears, each sound stabbing like a knife. She looked around, hoping someone would step in, but no one moved. Some people lowered their eyes, pretending not to notice, while others simply watched with silent judgment. Zuri's chest rose and fell quickly. She felt heat rush to her face, her throat tight as tears threatened to fall. She was used to whispers, used to people calling her names behind her back, but this was different. This was open, sharp, and in front of her son. Tay's small body shook as he tried to hide, and she could feel his shame mixing with her own. For a moment, anger flared inside her, hot and wild. She wanted to scream, to snatch the shoes from the woman's hand, to tell them all how cruel they were. But then the anger faded into something heavier, something that made her knees weak. Despair. A hopelessness so deep it felt like drowning. She wondered if this was how her life would always be, mocked, belittled, crushed under the weight of people who thought they were better. Her fingers brushed through Tay's hair, trying to comfort him, but her own hands were trembling. She forced a smile down at him, but her lips quivered. She wanted him to feel safe, but in that moment she didn't feel safe at all. Every laugh, every cruel word, pressed harder into her chest until she felt she couldn't breathe. The shoes dangled mockingly in the woman's hand, the symbol of all their scorn. And there, in that cafe filled with laughter and silence, Zuri felt herself break inside. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was despair, deep and dark, the kind that made her question if she could ever rise again. The laughter was at its loudest, sharp and cruel, when the cafe doors suddenly swung open with a loud creak. The sound cut through the noise like a knife. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and in walked a tall man dressed in a dark suit that seemed to command attention without effort. His steps were slow, steady, and every eye in the room followed him. The air shifted, as though even the walls recognized who had just entered. Some people gasped quietly, others whispered in disbelief, and then the name moved through the cafe like a wave, Chike Okonkwo. He was the man people in Nigeria spoke of with both fear and respect, a billionaire no one ever saw in public, a man so private that the press called him the ghost of business. Many doubted he was even real because he avoided cameras, avoided parties, avoided every spotlight. And yet, here he was, standing in the middle of an ordinary cafe, his presence filling the room like a storm. The women who had been laughing at Zuri froze instantly, their smiles vanishing. One of them dropped her phone in shock. Another covered her mouth as if she had just cursed in church. The men in the cafe straightened their backs, their voices falling silent. Even the waiters stood frozen with trays in their hands, too stunned to move. Chike's eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the room slowly. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, didn't acknowledge the whispers. His gaze landed on Zuri and her little boy, still pressed tightly against her side. For a moment, he said nothing, and that silence was louder than the laughter had been moments earlier. Zuri looked up at him with wide, confused eyes, her cheeks still wet from the humiliation she had endured. The mocking woman still held Tay's shoes in her hand, but now her fingers trembled. The power she felt moments ago vanished as Chike's dark eyes fell on her. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked, and no sound came out. The whole cafe was watching, waiting for what this powerful man would do. Chike walked forward, each step echoing against the tiled floor. His presence was heavy but calm, like a lion that didn't need to roar to be feared. He reached the table without a word, his tall figure towering over the women. Then, in one simple, deliberate motion, he took the small shoes from the woman's hand. She didn't resist, she couldn't. It was as if her entire body had turned to stone under his gaze. The cafe held its breath. No one moved, no one whispered now. All eyes were on him. He bent down, and to everyone's shock, this billionaire, this untouchable figure, knelt before the little boy and gently slipped the shoes back on his feet. The room was so silent it felt like time itself had paused. And in that moment, the humiliation turned into something else entirely, a silence filled with awe. Chike stood tall at Zuri's table, his presence so strong that even the air felt heavy. The mocking woman still held Tay's shoes loosely, her hand shaking. Without saying a word, Chike reached out and took the small shoes from her fingers. She lowered her eyes quickly, unable to meet his gaze. Then, in a move no one expected, this billionaire who could command entire boardrooms knelt down on the cafe floor. The cafe gasped softly as he crouched before the frightened little boy. His hands were steady, gentle, as he slid the shoes back onto Tay's small feet and tied them carefully, almost like a father would. The boy blinked up at him in surprise, his tears slowing, his trembling easing as if some invisible shield had covered him. The silence in the cafe was almost too heavy to bear. No one laughed anymore. No one dared whisper. Every eye was fixed on the man who had just broken all expectations by kneeling for a poor single mother's child. Zoe's lips parted in shock, her eyes wide as if she was witnessing a dream. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but for the first time that day it was not from shame, it was from disbelief. Chike stood again, tall and calm, and without looking at the women who had mocked Zuri, he pulled a sleek black card from his wallet and placed it on the table. His deep voice broke the silence at last, smooth but commanding, as he told the waiter to bring the most expensive meals on the menu. He ordered drinks, desserts, and dishes Zuri had never even heard of. The waiter nodded quickly, almost stumbling as he rushed away. The cafe, once filled with cruel laughter, was now filled with awe. Some customers looked at Zuri with new respect, while others simply shook their heads, unable to believe what they were seeing. The women who had mocked her sat frozen, their faces pale, their pride shattered. They shifted in their seats uncomfortably, glancing at one another but finding no courage to speak. Zuri lowered her gaze, unsure if she should thank him or stay silent. Her throat felt tight, her eyes burning again, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was from the shock of being seen, being defended, without having to beg. She glanced at her son, who was staring at Chaik with wide eyes full of wonder, his fear completely gone. For Zuri, that small act, putting shoes back on her boy's feet, meant more than all the riches in the world. It was dignity. It was respect. It was hope. She clutched Tae's hand tightly, still trembling, as the billionaire sat beside them, his face unreadable but his presence telling the whole cafe one simple truth: the tables had already begun to turn. The food had just been ordered when the silence finally cracked. One of the women, her pride bruised beyond repair, found her voice. She tossed her hair back and scoffed, her words sharp with anger. "This is ridiculous. She's just trash. She doesn't belong here." Another quickly joined her, emboldened by the sound of her friend's voice. "Yes. Look at her. Look at her clothes. She's nothing. She's a beggar, and now you're treating her like a queen?" Their laughter was gone now, replaced by desperate anger, their faces flushed red as they tried to cling to the attention slipping away from them. Chaik slowly turned his head toward them. His face was calm, but his eyes were like ice, piercing straight through their bravado. When he spoke, his voice was low and sharp, every word cutting through the room like glass. "Funny," he said, pausing just long enough to let the silence stretch, "your husband's work for me." The women's mouths fell open, their eyes wide. Before they could even respond, he added, colder than before, "and now, they don't." The cafe erupted in whispers, people gasping as Chaik pulled out his phone and made quick, effortless calls in front of everyone. His tone didn't rise, it didn't falter, he simply gave orders, calm and final. Within minutes, the women's world unraveled. Their husbands, men who relied on Chaik's contracts, were stripped of them on the spot. Deals worth millions, gone in seconds, because of their cruelty. The women's faces drained of color as the truth sank in. They tried to protest, stammering and pleading. "Please, Mr. Okonkwo, we didn't mean," but their voices shook, their words crumbling under the weight of their own fear. No one in the cafe felt pity for them. Customers who had watched them laugh at Zuri now watched them squirm, powerless and humiliated. It was as if the air itself had flipped, and all the power they had clung to just minutes before had vanished like smoke. Zuri sat frozen, her hand still clutching Tae's. She had dreamed of standing up to people like them, of proving she was more than the insults they threw, but she never imagined it would happen like this. She looked at Chaik, her eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't just defended her, he had changed everything with a single sentence. The women, who had once towered over her with cruel laughter, now shrank into their seats, their shoulders hunched, their voices gone. They couldn't even meet Zuri's gaze anymore. The cafe, once their stage for mockery, had turned into their prison of shame. For the first time that day, Zuri's chest didn't feel heavy. She breathed deeply, watching them crumble, and deep inside she felt something new: vindication. The tables had turned, and the whole cafe had witnessed it. After the cafe finally emptied, leaving only the soft clatter of dishes and the occasional whisper of a waiter, Chaik stayed behind. He gestured for Zuri to sit across from him at the table, his expression calm, almost unreadable. She hesitated at first, unsure if this was another trick, another humiliation waiting to happen. But something in his eyes stopped her from rising again. He didn't speak at first, letting the quiet stretch between them. The air felt heavy, but not with fear this time, it was heavy with possibility. Finally, he leaned back, studying her like someone measuring the weight of a rare gem. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I don't see a failure. I see fire. And I recognize that fire because I've lived it." Zuri blinked, surprised. She had expected pity, maybe a pat on the shoulder, but not this calm understanding. Her heart, still racing from the events of the past hour, began to slow. Chaik's eyes softened slightly, and he began to speak of his own past. He had grown up in poverty, he told her, abandoned by a father who had no patience, no guidance, no care. He had learned early how the world could crush a person if they didn't fight back. He saw the same fight, the same determination, burning in Zuri's eyes now. "I know what it's like to be looked down on," he said. "To be ignored, to be treated like your life doesn't matter. But that doesn't define you." Zuri listened, feeling a mixture of awe and disbelief. No one had ever said words like this to her, words that felt real, that felt true. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly as she tried to keep her composure. Then he leaned forward, his voice firm and deliberate. "I want you to join me. I have a foundation dedicated to empowering single mothers across Africa. And I want you to be part of it. Starting with you. You'll have a platform, resources, and support to help women like you rise, to show the world that we are not failures, we are fighters." Zuri's eyes widened, her mouth slightly open. She had imagined opportunities before, dreamed quietly about something better for herself and Tay, but this was beyond anything she had dared to hope for. Her chest swelled with a strange mix of relief and excitement, and tears threatened to spill. Chike studied her quietly for a moment, then smiled just faintly, the first real warmth she had seen from him all day. "I don't offer charity," he said. "I offer respect and a chance to make a real difference. The choice is yours." Zuri nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just a chance for a better life. It was a recognition of her strength, her fire, and everything she had fought for in silence. For the first time, she realized that her story was just beginning, and the possibilities were endless. Days passed, then weeks, and Zuri's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She woke each morning no longer with dread or fear, but with purpose. Her small apartment, once cramped and worn, now felt like a home filled with laughter and light. Tay's mornings were no longer rushed or quiet. He dressed in crisp uniforms, his shoes polished, his backpack filled with books and dreams. Zuri watched him walk to school with a proud smile on her face, the boy she had fought so hard for finally free from the shame and fear that had haunted them both. Zuri herself changed too. Gone were the worn clothes and nervous glances. In their place were tailored suits and a posture that spoke of confidence and strength. She traveled to charity events and galas, often standing on stages she had once only dreamed of. Cameras flashed, journalists asked about her story, and she shared it openly, her voice steady, her words carrying hope to thousands who had felt the same despair she once knew. Every speech she gave, every story she told, reminded people that a single mother was not weak, she could be unstoppable. People who had once whispered behind her back or laughed at her struggles now stared from the sidelines. The women in the cafe, the ones who had mocked her in front of everyone, saw her name in newspapers, heard it on the radio, watched her photo on television. Their laughter had turned to silence. They tried to avoid her gaze when she walked past, shrinking under the weight of their own regret. Zuri no longer noticed them much. She had bigger things to focus on: projects, programs, and inspiring mothers across the city and beyond. Her work with Chike's foundation grew steadily. She helped single mothers find education, jobs, and confidence. She organized workshops, raised funds, and created opportunities for women who had felt invisible for too long. Each day, she saw results: women learning to read, to run businesses, to stand tall with pride. And it filled her with a joy deeper than any luxury she had ever owned. Even Tay's life was transformed. He excelled in school, made new friends, and smiled freely, no longer carrying the weight of shame he had felt months before. And whenever Zuri watched him, she felt a quiet strength within herself, a reminder of the fight that had brought them here. Zuri's story spread far and wide, not just as a tale of wealth or charity, but as proof that courage, dignity, and persistence could overturn even the cruelest of circumstances. She had risen from humiliation to admiration, from despair to influence. And while those who had once shamed her remained powerless and small in comparison, Zuri moved forward, unstoppable, her life no longer defined by others' cruelty but by her own strength and the bright future she was building, one day at a time. Months later, Zuri walked into the same cafe where her life had felt so small and cruel. The familiar hum of chatter and clinking cups filled the air, but this time it felt different. She moved with confidence, her tailored suit crisp and elegant, her head held high. Employees rushed to greet her, smiling as they opened doors and pulled out chairs. She nodded politely, a quiet authority in her presence that made the cafe feel like a stage and her its star. This was no longer the place of shame, it was a place where she could give back. Her eyes scanned the room, and she spotted several struggling mothers sitting quietly, some looking tired, others worn down by life's weight. Zuri waved a waiter over and, with a simple gesture, ordered a full meal for every single mother present. Plates filled with warm food arrived at tables, and the women looked up, their eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Zuri smiled softly, seeing the spark of hope return to their faces, just as someone had once sparked it for her. Then her gaze fell on the women who had once mocked her, their faces frozen in recognition. Their whispers died as they realized who was standing before them. Zuri paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch, then smiled, a slow, calm smile that carried years of struggle, strength, and triumph. "Funny how tables turn, isn't it?" she said, her voice steady and clear. The cafe erupted in applause. Strangers cheered, mothers clapped, and even Tay, standing proudly beside her, joined in with a wide smile. The women who had laughed at her months before shrank in their seats, powerless and silent. Zuri didn't need to say more. The moment spoke for itself, she had risen, and the world, once cruel and mocking, now watched her shine. It was not just victory, it was poetic justice, and she had earned every second of it.